The auctioneer's voice rang through the livestock arena with a grim finality. Lot 47, he called out, giving only a passing glance to the chestnut mare shivering in the sales ring. She was the sort of animal most people overlooked, her ribs visible beneath a lackluster coat, head drooping low, her eyes empty of any spark. The bidding began at $50. Silence. $40. Still nothing. 25. Again, no one spoke up, but at the rear of the crowd, a seasoned rancher named Hank Dawson couldn't look away. Something about the mare tugged at him, a tightness in his chest he couldn't explain. Then he spotted it, a tiny white scar above her right eye, shaped like a sliver of moon. In that instant, time seemed to freeze. Hank's hands trembled. That scar, he knew it. It seemed impossible, yet he recognized it as clearly as his own reflection. His thoughts flew back over 15 years of searching, 15 years of wondering, 15 years of a guilt that had eaten at him slowly, like rust on metal. The mare in that ring wasn't just another throwaway horse. She was Willow, his Willow. The foal he'd helped bring into the world on an icy March morning 23 years ago. The baby he'd bottle-fed for a week because her mother couldn't produce milk. The young mare who disappeared from his ranch without a clue 15 years back, leaving behind only unanswered questions and a wound in his heart that had never closed. The auctioneer's voice broke through Hank's daze, going once for 25. Hank's throat was so constricted he could hardly breathe, let alone call out a bid, going twice. His feet began moving before his mind could even process it, shoving his way through the onlookers toward the ring. The other bidders turned to stare. This wild-eyed older man staggering forward as if he'd seen a spirit, and maybe he had. Sold for 25 to 100, Hank's voice finally broke free, cracking with emotion. The entire arena went quiet, people watched, astonished. The auctioneer looked surprised. $100 for a half-starved mare nobody wanted was either an act of mercy or madness. But what followed was something nobody present would ever forget. The moment Hank's voice carried across the space, the mare's head shot up. Her ears, which had been flattened in fear and despair, suddenly pricked forward. She turned toward the sound, scanning the crowd with eyes that had been lifeless moments before, and when her gaze met Hank's face, something unbelievable happened. She took one step toward him, then another. The handler holding her lead stood motionless, confused, as the mare moved with clear intent, pulling against the rope with a strength no one knew she possessed. Hank reached the edge of the sales ring just as Willow reached the railing. They stood there, separated by steel bars and a decade and a half apart, just looking at one another. Hank's rough hand extended slowly, shaking as he moved it toward her face. Everyone in the arena seemed to hold their breath. Willow stretched her neck forward, closing the gap, and pressed her muzzle into Hank's palm. The old rancher's control dissolved. At the sound of her name, the mare's entire frame began to quiver. She pushed firmly against the rail, trying to get nearer to this person who remembered her, who had never given up looking, who had just saved her life while unknowingly saving his own heart in the process. The auctioneer cleared his throat, visibly affected but trying to stay professional. Sold to the gentleman at the back for $100, Hank hardly heard. His world had shrunk to only the horse before him. The horse he believed was gone for good. As the handler guided Willow from the ring toward the buyer's area, she never stopped watching Hank. Her walk was different now, head lifted, ears alert, as if the simple act of being recognized had restored a part of her she'd lost. In the holding pen, Hank could finally get near Willow without anything between them. He moved his hands across her body, noting every injury, each mark of neglect, every scar that spoke of the years he'd missed. Willow remained perfectly still for his inspection, but every so often she would turn her head to look at him, as if confirming he was real, that this wasn't another painful dream. When Hank's fingers found the old brand on her hip, partly hidden by grime and tangled hair, his anger began to rise. His brand was still there, proof that someone had taken her from his property and sold her off. Someone had stolen his horse and left her to endure 15 years of hardship that left her so broken. But for now, anger could wait. All that mattered was bringing Willow home. Hank borrowed a trailer from the auction, vowing to bring it back the following day. Loading Willow was unexpectedly simple. She walked right up the ramp and into the trailer as if she'd been anticipating this, as if she understood exactly where she was headed. During the 3-hour trip back to the ranch as dusk approached, Hank kept glancing in the rearview mirror, reassuring himself she was truly there, that it wasn't all in his head. When they finally arrived, Hank led Willow from the trailer and paused, letting her absorb the surroundings. The barn had been replaced since she'd last been there. The fields had new fences. The house wore a new coat of paint, but the land itself was the same, the scent of sage, the murmur of the creek, the sight of the distant mountains. Willow's nostrils widened as she took it all in. Her ears rotated, picking up familiar noises. Then she did something that made Hank's breath stick in his chest. She whinnied. It was a long, resonant call that traveled over the ranch. Within moments, an answer came from the main pasture. Willow's head spun toward the sound, her entire body rigid with focus. That answering call came from Daisy, Willow's mother. At 26 years old, Daisy was still healthy and lively, spending her retirement on Hank's ranch with other older horses. Hank had kept her through the years, partly because she was a good horse who'd earned her place, but mostly because letting her go would have felt like surrendering the hope of ever finding Willow. Now, as mother and daughter called back and forth in the fading light, Hank knew his heart had been right to hope all along. Some connections truly cannot be broken. Over the next several days, Hank focused on restoring Willow's health. The veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Chen, came for a complete checkup. Her findings were both devastating and enraging. Willow was dangerously thin, dehydrated, and malnourished. She had old injuries that were never properly cared for, including a poorly healed fracture in her left hind leg that left her with a slight limp. Her teeth had been ignored for years, making eating difficult. She bore scars from harsh treatment, and her hooves were in awful shape, overgrown and split from neglect. But this mare has an amazing will to live, Dr. Chen said as she finished. Most horses in her state would have quit. She's a fighter. Hank looked at Willow, who stood calmly, her head resting against his chest as he stroked her neck. She's always been a fighter. It will take months of careful feeding and rehabilitation, Dr. Chen went on. But I believe we can return her to a comfortable life. She'll likely always have that limp. She's too old and injured to be ridden again, but she can be happy here. That's all I want, Hank said softly, just for her to be happy. After Dr. Chen left, Hank brought Willow out to the pasture where Daisy and the other retired horses lived. He'd waited for the vet's approval before this reunion, wanting to be certain Willow was strong enough for the excitement. The second he opened the gate, Daisy came trotting over. She was elderly, but she moved with the energy of a much younger horse. The two mares touched noses, breathing in each other's scent. For a long while, neither moved. Then Daisy started to groom Willow, moving her teeth gently along her daughter's neck and shoulders, making the soft, nickering sounds mother horses use with their foals. Willow's eyes partly closed in satisfaction, and for the first time since Hank found her, she looked truly peaceful. In the weeks that followed, as Willow slowly regained weight and strength, Hank started to reconstruct what might have happened to her years before. He contacted the authorities, showed them Willow's brand, and filed a theft report. The investigation quickly led to a now-defunct horse dealer who'd operated a stolen horse ring 15 years earlier. The man had since passed away, but his records showed dozens of horses stolen from ranches across 3 states and sold through various auctions. Willow had been one of them. She was stolen when she was just 8 years old in her prime, and had spent the next 15 years being sold from one owner to another, never staying anywhere long enough to be traced back to her original home. The paper trail was heartbreaking. Willow had been sold at least 7 times, each sale taking her farther from home and into worse situations. She'd been used as a broodmare, forced to produce foals that were taken from her and sold. She'd been worked hard in all weather, fed poorly, and treated as nothing more than property. By the time she reached the auction where Hank found her, she was seen as worthless, too old and broken to be of any use, but she had survived. Against all odds, through 15 years of cruelty and neglect, she had endured. And somehow, some part of her had remembered, had recognized Hank's voice in that packed arena, had known she was finally heading home. 3 months after her rescue, Willow was nearly unrecognizable. Her coat, once dull and thin, now shone with health. She'd recovered most of her lost weight, becoming slender but no longer skeletal. Her eyes, so vacant and hopeless at the auction, now gleamed with peace. She still had the limp from her old injury, and she always would. But it didn't seem to trouble her as she moved around the pasture with Daisy and the others, grazing in sunlight and resting in the shade. Hank visited her every day, often several times. Sometimes he brought treats, apples, carrots, or the special grain mix Dr. Chen recommended. Sometimes he just stood with her, his hand on her neck, both quiet and content in each other's company. And sometimes, like this morning, he'd sit on the fence and talk to her, telling her about his day, about the ranch, about the 15 years they'd lost. "I never stopped searching for you," he told her, his voice thick with feeling. "Even when everyone said I should move on, that you were likely dead or too far gone to find, I kept looking. I kept hoping because I couldn't bear the idea of you out there somewhere, alone and frightened, thinking nobody cared." Willow stood near the fence, her head level with Hank's chest, listening. Her ears were forward, fixed on him, and now and then she would nuzzle his shirt or breathe softly on his arm. "I used to dream about you," Hank continued, "about finding you and bringing you home. But in my dreams, you were always young, always the lively mare I remembered. I never pictured finding you the way I did, broken and scared and so close to giving up." His voice faltered. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I let someone take you. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you." Willow shifted closer, pressing her forehead to Hank's chest in a comforting gesture. It was as if she understood, as if she were telling him it wasn't his fault, that the only thing that mattered was they'd found each other again. Hank wrapped his arms around her neck and wept, really wept for the first time since she'd vanished. He cried for the lost years, for the pain she'd suffered, for the guilt he'd held. But he also cried from relief and thankfulness that, against all odds, in an auction arena hundreds of miles from home, he'd noticed a small crescent moon scar and rescued the horse he'd never stopped loving. The tale of Hank and Willow's reunion traveled through the local community and further. News organizations shared it, featuring stories about the rancher who'd identified his stolen horse 15 years after she disappeared. People from across the nation reached out, sharing their own accounts of lost and found animals, of creatures who remembered their people after years apart, of bonds that nothing could destroy. But what moved people most deeply happened 6 months after Willow's rescue. Hank got a call from a horse rescue organization 3 states away. They'd been contacted by a woman who saw the news story about Willow and thought she might have information about one of Willow's foals. The woman explained that 10 years earlier she'd purchased a young gelding at an auction. The horse had been terrified and challenging, taking her months to earn his trust. She'd named him Cooper, and over time he'd become her most valued companion. But she'd always wondered about his past, about why such a beautiful, well-bred horse had ended up scared and alone at an auction. When she saw the story about Willow, she noticed something. Cooper had the same unique white blaze on his face, the same elegant build, the same intelligent eyes. She'd checked his age and calculated. He would have been born during one of the years Willow was used as a broodmare. "Would you," the woman asked hesitantly, "be willing to do a DNA test to see if Cooper might be Willow's son? I know it's a long shot, but something in my heart tells me they're connected." Hank agreed right away. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. Cooper was indeed Willow's son, born when she was 15 and taken from her when he was only 6 months old. The woman, Rebecca, was crying when she phoned Hank with the news. She had an idea. Her ranch was too distant for regular visits, but she had vacation time saved. Would it be okay if she brought Cooper to visit his mother for a few days so they could meet? Hank's reply was instant: bring him home. When Rebecca's trailer arrived at the ranch a week later, Hank was waiting with Willow at his side. Cooper, a handsome 12-year-old gelding with his mother's chestnut coloring and fine features, backed out of the trailer with his ears forward, studying his new environment. The moment Willow saw him, her whole body froze. Her ears locked forward, her nostrils flared as she caught his scent on the air. Then she called to him. It was a sound Hank had never heard from her before, the distinct whinny a mare uses to call her foal. Cooper's head whipped toward the sound. He answered, high and eager, and began pulling toward Willow, dancing on the end of his lead. Rebecca, realizing what was happening, released him. Cooper trotted directly to Willow, and the 2 horses touched noses, breathing each other in for several long minutes. They stood like that, mother and son together after 10 years apart. Then Willow began grooming Cooper, running her teeth along his neck just as her own mother had groomed her on her first day home. Cooper stood still for her attention, making quiet, contented noises, and Hank had to turn away because tears were welling up again, and he didn't want Rebecca to witness an old rancher cry. Cooper stayed for 2 weeks, and during that time, he and Willow were never apart. They grazed together, napped side by side, and played gentle games as if Willow were young and whole again. Daisy often joined them. 3 generations of mares united at last. When it was time for Cooper to leave, Rebecca made Hank a promise. "I'll bring him back every summer. For as long as Willow lives, I'll bring him home to see his mother," and she kept that promise. Every summer for the next 5 years, Cooper came to the ranch for 2 weeks. Every summer, Willow would call to him as he stepped from the trailer. Every summer they spent their days together. And every summer, saying goodbye became a little easier because they both knew he'd return. Willow lived to be 28 years old, a small miracle given all she'd endured. In her last summer, she was too weak to do much more than stand in the shade and doze. But when Cooper arrived for his yearly visit, she still found the energy to walk out to meet him, to touch noses, to spend her days with her son beside her. 2 weeks after Cooper went home that year, Willow lay down in the pasture next to her mother and passed away peacefully in her sleep. Daisy stood watch over her body until Hank found them at daybreak, and the old mare's sorrow was clear in her low, grieving calls. Hank buried Willow on a hill overlooking the ranch with a view of the mountains she loved. He planted wildflowers on her grave and had a stone carved with her name and the words she never forgot. Rebecca brought Cooper back for one final visit. The young gelding stood by the grave for hours, as if knowing his mother was gone but wanting to be close to her one last time. As the sun set over the ranch that evening, Hank sat by Willow's grave and reflected on everything that had occurred. About finding her at the auction, about nursing her back to health, about the years they'd had together after 15 years apart, about Cooper and the wonder of their reunion. About bonds that nothing, not time, distance, or cruelty could destroy. "Some folks might say it was just chance," Hank said quietly, his words drifting on the evening wind. "That I just happened to be at that auction, that I just noticed a small scar. But I think Willow was meant to come home. I believe some part of her never stopped believing she'd find her way back. And I think she held on through all those terrible years because she remembered how it felt to be loved." He stood up, his old joints creaking, and placed a hand on the stone. "Thank you for coming home, Willow. Thank you for remembering me. Thank you for showing me that love doesn't forget, even when everything else does." Years later, people still spoke of the mare who remembered. Ranchers would tell the story to their children, stressing the importance of treating animals kindly, of never quitting on the lost, of paying attention to the small details others miss. Horse rescue groups used Willow's story to inspire people to look at the broken and unwanted horses at auctions, to see past the neglect to the spirit within. And Hank, until he died at 83, never stopped visiting Willow's grave. Never stopped sharing her story, never stopped believing that love, true love, outlasts everything. The ranch remained in Hank's family, passed to his niece, who'd grown up hearing tales of Willow. She kept Daisy until the old mare died at 31, and she tended Willow's grave as a sort of memorial. And every summer, Rebecca still brought Cooper, now 19, to visit the hill where his mother was buried. He would stand there for hours, quiet and thoughtful, as if showing his respect, as if remembering, because some connections truly are unbreakable. Some love truly is forever, and sometimes, against all odds, the lost find their way home. If this story of Willow and Hank moved you, please subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to remember that love and loyalty can endure anything. Have you ever been reunited with a lost animal? Tell us your story in the comments. Remember, every unwanted horse at every auction has a story. Sometimes all they need is someone who takes the time to look, really look, and see the soul beneath the pain. Until next time, keep believing in second chances and the power of never giving up on those we love.